Remember the other day I talked about giving away some signed copies of this? Well, this is one of those videos that will give you that opportunity. So keep watching right to the end. I'll tell you exactly how you can get your hands on your own signed copy of my book, The Mechanic. Today's video, though, is a good one. I hope it's going to be a good one. I'm going to talk today about some of my favourite cheats, tricks, loopholes that have been exploited over the years in F1. This was the very reason I got involved in Formula One in the first place. One of the things that attracted me to this incredible sport. So I'm going to give you a list today of some of the best ones of those that I've seen over the years that have subsequently been banned by the regulators, never to be seen again. But just for a short period of time, the designers, the engineers at some of those teams have given their teams or their cars or their drivers a distinct advantage over the competition. Sometimes just for a very short period of time. But that is why we love F1. We go to incredible lengths for some tiny, tiny advantages. Just before I started working at Mclaren, this was back in 1997, Mclaren came up with the ingenious idea that had a number of different names. We called it torque steer, brake steer, the fiddle brake. Essentially, a third brake pedal down in the footwell of that 1997 and 1998 McLaren car that was busted and blown wide open by Darren Heath, the photographer, who, when one of the McLarens broke down near him at the side of the track in 97, when there were rumours starting to circulate, people were getting suspicious because they'd noticed that the rear brakes, the inside rear brake on a corner was glowing red hot on the McLaren, which was unusual. Wouldn't normally happen during the corners. So he took the opportunity to stick his camera inside the cockpit, flash a number of photos down the footwell, and noticed there was a third pedal, which was unusual because clutch pedals had long gone in Formula One. They'd all moved to the back of the steering wheel as they are today. What was happening was McLaren had come up with this system with an extra brake pedal that could control the inside rear brake independently of the front brakes of the car. So the car would steam down the straight, jump on the brakes as normal, turn into the corner. Towards the exit, from the mid-apex towards the exit of the corner, when you want to start getting back on the throttle, it's very easy, if you get on the throttle too early, to start spinning up the inside rear wheel, brake traction, induce oversteer, and off you go into the gravel trap. But the opposite side of that is you want to get on the throttle as early as possible to start getting the power down. Well, what they did was that third brake pedal controlled the inside rear brake disc. So started to apply brake pressure to put the brakes on, essentially just on the inside rear wheel. That was the one that was most likely to spin up in these corners. So the drivers could balance that, get the throttle on, start to put the power down towards the exit of the corner, which is what they want to do, whilst balancing that throttle application with some of this extra brake pedal application. So all the power would be going through the outside rear wheel where it had all the traction. The inside rear wheel would be held back a little bit by the brake pedal, stopping it spinning up, get incredible drive out of the corners onto the next straight. It was an ingenious system. Pretty simple. Needed a specific set of brake material on the back so that it was really progressive braking. It didn't grab the brakes, which would induce all sorts of other problems. And the drivers, of course, Mika Hakkinen and David Coulthard, had to really get used to learning to use this. Completely different driving style needed to make this work. But they did that very quickly. It meant the car had a huge advantage throughout 1997. They continued it into 1998 until at the Brazilian Grand Prix, when Ferrari complained, even though the system had been passed legal previously by Charlie Whiting, the stewards at the Brazilian Grand Prix deemed it illegal and it was subsequently banned. McLaren's F-Duct. That's another brilliant one. I remember that being in development when I was still at McLaren, and I remember the engineers or the designer coming down to explain this concept that they'd come up with and talking to me about it. And I remember thinking at the time, what a brilliantly simple, ingenious solution to a problem that was. Essentially, we had a duct on the top of the chassis connected to a bit of ducting that ran all the way along the chassis, through past the driver, out through the engine cover, and blew directly on the top of the rear wing main plane. Now, halfway along that ducting, next to the driver's leg, was a little hole or a little vent. Now, most of the time, that duct would take the airflow in from the top of the chassis, pass it in, the air would then bleed out of that hole into the chassis and kind of go nowhere. But when the car was going flat out along a long straight, when you want the least amount of downforce possible, a little bit like DRS, the way DRS works now, the driver could cover with his left leg, which wasn't required, of course, along a long straight, doesn't need to press the brake pedal. He could move his knee over and cover this little hole or this little vent inside the ducting to block it off. What that did was redirect that airflow that's being pulled in from the top of the chassis. Now all of that airflow, high-speed airflow, being sent all the way through the chassis, out past the engine cover and being blown at the top of the rear wing, completely stalling the rear wing at high speed, essentially dumping all of that drag that it would otherwise have going along the long straight when you want maximum speed. It essentially changes the pressure differential between the top and the underside of the rear wing, and what that does is dump downforce and consequently dump drag. It was such a simple idea. It was no movable aerodynamic devices, so it didn't contravene any regulations. It was just a brilliant idea. Lots of other teams tried to copy it, but because it was integrated into the chassis, it wasn't the easiest thing to implement later on. And actually, it was such a good idea that the modern DRS system is essentially a derivative of that. One of my favourites, that one. One of the best ones that directly affected me through my time at McLaren was something that was responsible for helping the pit stop crew quite dramatically, and it was around refuelling. Back then everybody had exactly the same refuelling rigs. They were a standard item. It was specifically banned within the regulations to modify that in any way to speed up your process. And the way it worked was that the nozzle was attached to the car. The required amount of fuel was pumped in. When that fuel was in the car, there's a motorised butterfly valve that would begin to close and shut off the fuel rig from the car. And when that valve was closed, the refueler's light display on the nozzle would change from green or from red to green, and that was his signal to disconnect the nozzle from the car and attach it and launch the car back into the race. Well, what we decided or discovered that we could do, that motorised butterfly valve that was inside the nozzle took probably half a second to a second to actually close. And we used, without modifying the rig in any way, a simple doctor's stethoscope concealed inside the fireproof suit of the refueler. It went up the sleeve of the refueler's arm. The earpiece, of course, went into his ear. The other end, the bit that the doctor puts on your chest when you're having an examination, was pressed onto the fuel nozzle itself. And by doing that, we could hear when the motorised butterfly valve began to whir up and start the process of closing. That, of course, as I say, took a little bit of time. By the time that motorised valve was closed, our refueler already knew that was happening and had started the process of disconnecting that refuelling nozzle. And by the time the green lights came on to say the valve was completely shut, our nozzle was pretty much completely disconnected from the car at that point, and the car was launched straight back into the race, saving us, as I say, probably something between half a second and a second with every pit stop, which was a significant chunk. The best thing about it was, I don't think anybody ever knew it was happening. It was totally top secret, and we were in on this brilliant little cheat and trick. Right, bear with me. Got to get the barnet cut. One of the really clever and simple systems that I've talked about before but I love was Renault or Benetton's start system in the mid-2000s. They had realised and then identified that there was this individual electronic signal being sent out from Charlie Whiting's big red button to start the race that went out to essentially turn off all of the jump start sensors that are buried in the tarmac underneath each grid position. The Renault or Benetton car rather would scan for that frequency. They'd pick up on the signal and either would automatically launch their car through a launch control system, or if not, would give a little audible tone inside the earpiece of Fernando Alonso or whoever the driver might be to essentially launch the car and start the race. Whereas everyone else was having to wait and have that delayed human reaction time to the traffic lights at the beginning of the front of the grid changing and all the red lights going out. It didn't last very long, of course, got banned, but once again gave them an advantage for a short period of time. That's what Formula One is all about. Right, just got time for a quick run before I go and pick the kids up from school. Now, there have been some brilliant ideas over the years, some of them incredibly inventive, some of them exploiting loopholes or pushing the boundaries of the rules, bending the interpretation of those regulations that are constantly being written to try and peg the engineers back. The engineers are always trying to push back the other way. There are some, however, that just downright cross that line into utter cheating. BAR's secret hidden fuel tank that they ran in the cars a few years ago to try and allow the car to run underweight for large portions of the race. Outright cheating. Benetton's traction control in the 90s. Renault getting Nelson Piquet Jr. to crash deliberately at a strategic moment in the Singapore Grand Prix. There are some of these brilliant tweaks and inventions though that are simply that, brilliant. The ground effect cars from way back when. The Brabham fan car, unbelievable idea. I think, from memory, it only raced for one race before it got banned. Imagine what went into that for one race. Great thinking outside the box though. Renault's mass damper of the mid-2000s. Again, very simple. The great ideas are always the most simple. Simple but really, really effective. The double diffuser, of course, of 2009. Absolutely changed the game. Some brilliant, brilliant ideas throughout the history of Formula One. Six-wheeled cars back in the day too. That's one of the things that attracted me to Formula One in the first place, seeing these wild and crazy inventions racing around a racetrack. Carefully engineered, flexible wings. Wings that easily passed the static load tests of their time, yet once they were out on track under huge aerodynamic load, deformed to dump a load of drag along the straights and increase the top speed. Exhaust blown diffusers, exhaust blown rear wings. There are so many, and these kind of things I love. I kind of like the constant battle between rule makers and the teams, but part of me thinks just let them get on with it. Let them come up with more of this stuff. Stop closing every single loophole. This is what Formula One should be about. Creativity in an engineering sense. Right, I'm not done yet. I've got to run home now. I'm sure I've missed some out because there are so many, and I know I'll have forgotten some. Let me know if I have. I'm sure you will. But look, I love Formula One for those very reasons that Formula One is full. It's built on inventive, creative, innovative people who, if you give them a boundary line and say you cannot cross that line, they will find a way to go around it. And that is one of the things that's most brilliant about this sport that we all love. Look, I hope you've liked some of those little ideas. Please do send me others that you know of, that you've heard of, that I haven't covered. I'd love to be reminded of them all. And I suppose you want to know how you can win one of these books then. Hold on. That's better. Right, all you got to do, if you want to win one of these, which I highly recommend, great book. If you're a Formula One fan, there are some brilliant, brilliant stories in here, even if I do say so myself. I think you'll like it. If you want to win one, it's very simple. All you need to do is be a subscriber to this YouTube channel. I'm sure lots of you already are. Hit the like button below, and then importantly, hit the share button and share this episode of the vlog on one of your social media channels. When you do that, tag me in it. Tag me in the post on your social channel where you share this episode. My social media handles are all coming up on the screen in just a moment. When you tag me, I will see it on my feed, on my social media, and from one of those tags, one of those posts, I will pick a or maybe some winners for which I will personally sign the books and send them out to you. So please do like the video if you have liked it, subscribe, and importantly share, tag me in it, and I will see you tomorrow.